Okay. So I'm Dr. Karen Sumner, and I hope you are all doing well this evening. We're going to talk a little bit about micro political leadership and systems thinking and some examples of things you may have seen in your schools, either your current school or ones where you've worked before, and things you wish you had seen or things that you would like to do differently. For so many of us, when we decided to become teachers, we had examples of teachers who were amazing and we wanted to mimic those behaviors and we wanted to do what they did. And then we also had some non-examples, those teachers who read from the textbook or were oblivious or any number of other things. And those were our anti-examples. So I think it's true for you as administrators as well. You have great examples, hopefully, and you probably have a few anti-examples of folks who may have done things a little differently. So let's get started, and then I'll just go over a few things, and then I'd love for you to jump in and offer ideas, suggestions, and certainly we'll have time for questions as well. So, excuse me, with micropolitical leadership, we're really talking a lot about kind of systems thinking or things you do ahead of time, things you're purposeful about, whether that's thinking about your professional learning community schedule in your school and when is the appropriate time for that, and with what kind of regularity does that happen, and how much are you as the administrator involved, and what does that involvement look like? It could be scheduling procedures. It could be thinking about duty schedules, but bus duty, gate duty, whatever. Are we strategic about that? In particular right now, and this is certainly true in North Carolina, and I'll be interested to hear from South Carolina folks if what your MTSS situation is like, but in terms of in North Carolina and our multi-tiered systems of support, and really this has been true pre-MTSS, thinking about what do we do to differentiate, knowing we only have a certain block of time in the school day, how do we find time to, and it's called so many different things, but essentially remediate and provide extra support for those who need it, provide opportunities for growth and advancement for those who need it, and really being strategic about that happening, say, every day. So those are all kinds of strategic things that need to happen. The other thing that again, you have both positive and negative role models for is building relationships, and that's part of micropolitical leadership. That relationship part goes a long way in terms of being strategic. And I want you to really think about it this week. Do you feel heard? Do you feel listened to at your school? If yes, and I hope that's the case, then I hope you really pay attention to what administrators do to make you feel that way. How do you feel heard? What does that look like and sound like and feel like? Because that's where we are. That's what we want to be able to do. We no longer live in this sort of autocratic society where one person makes all the decisions. I remember years ago being at a school and being in charge of newspaper and some different things, and I would go and say, well, so what is my budget? What does this look like? And I was always told, if you need something, just let me know. But, we'll talk about it. And I look back and think, boy, have we come a long way. We are no longer in that world, hopefully. If you are in that world, then expect more and do more when you are an administrator. Because as you read through and thought about micropolitical leadership, it really is a lot about transparency and saying, how do we all join together and all be a part of this work to support our students? And so before, I'm going to stop with the lecture in just a minute and really get some ideas from you, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk to you about something really important. So some of you, I don't know, maybe none of you have heard about this, but near my house last week, a teenager was driving. He'd had his learner's permit for about 3 months, not quite, and his mom was in the passenger seat, and his two younger brothers, who were 10 and 13, were in the back seat. And he, no other conditions were going on. He just probably made an error in judgment. We're not sure. But he hit a tree, and the two brothers in the back were killed, pretty much on sight. So the mother, who was in the passenger seat, is a celebrated educator in Buncombe County, Asheville City Schools. Just phenomenal. Regional Teacher of the Year, just absolutely amazing. Her son, who was driving, attends Asheville High, and the youngest son was at a local private school, and the middle son was in the middle school where the mother teaches, and he was a student of hers. So I go through this really sad and horrible and unexplainable story to tell you that the principal of that middle school has been the principal for maybe 2 years. About 6 years ago, she was sitting where you are. She was my first class of Gardner-Webb students. And ironically, she's also a long-term friend of mine, and I've known her for years. But bottom line, last night at the visitation, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and hugged me and said, "You didn't tell me this would happen. You didn't prepare me for this. We didn't talk about this in class." So I think it is sort of apropos for me to say tonight that, without being morbid, I want you to have some conversations with administration in your school and say, what is our crisis plan if we really have a crisis? What does that look like? What do we do? Do we have the counseling and crisis staff to support that? Because they had to bring in, of course, outside support. And this principal, this administrator, is not only supporting the students, and she said, "You want to talk about a difficult situation? I have half of my student body who is deeply mourning this young man, and the other half is saying, I don't know why you're so upset. I saw somebody get shot and die Saturday night." So she's got this dichotomy that she's dealing with, and then she's got an entire faculty. Her staff is in all different levels of need and sadness and all kinds of those emotions as well. So again, I'm not trying to be morbid and just tell you this horrible story, but I do think that it's important to consider, how do we get our message out at the school? How do we share good news at the school? How do we share tragedy? What does that look like? How do we support our students and our community and our teachers when there is a tragedy? My hope and prayer for you is that you don't ever have to deal with that. But, if you're going to make a career of administration, you're probably going to have to deal with both ends of the spectrum. And that is part of micro-political leadership, because the more we build those relationships ahead of time, the more we have strength in numbers and layers of support in times of need. The more we know what we do in a crisis or a celebration, the more together we are when it happens. When my friend and former student had to speak to the media very quickly last week, she did a phenomenal job. And she definitely had support and help and folks gathered around her, but that may not always be the case. So I'm asking you to really consider this, because I have to have some kind of good or forward thinking coming out of this. So everybody promise that you'll go have these conversations and figure out, what that looks like and how you can be of support and what will your role be in terms of that. Okay. So enough of that. What I would love for you to share for a few minutes, and I know this kind of gets weird in terms of unmuting yourself and everything, but the systems that are in place in your schools that you think work really well in terms of micro-political leadership, whether it's PLC schedule or PLC agendas, maybe it's that remediation time, maybe it's scheduling, maybe it's the duty schedule, maybe it's peer observations or walkthroughs. It could be any number of things. Maybe it's how the school improvement team operates. So I would love to hear from some of you if you just got some examples of things that work well that you've noticed or seen in terms of micro-political leadership.
I'll say that I'm at a new school. This is the second year that I've been at my middle school. And then I was at an elementary school the past 5 years. And it's really different to see those two uh, different types of schools interact. But when I was in the elementary school, we had a set time that we were given during the day, during each week for PLC time. So it was time that was built into the schedule where we had someone take over our class, and we could have a set hour each week to run the PLC. So it wasn't like you had to do it during your planning, or you weren't staying after school. It was set already in the schedule each week, and that was really helpful. Really helpful. I think we're the only elementary school that does that in our county where I am. And now that I'm at the middle school, it's really hard to find time to do that PLC. You do it during your planning, which you're trying to plan for your classes anyway. So I was grateful for that time, and we got a lot done. You could definitely see the difference in what we could do during that set apart time for PLC.
That's an incredible schedule, and it definitely unusual. So yeah, it's unlikely you will see that again. It would be great if you would share. I don't know if you have a copy of what that schedule looked like, but that would be a great thing to share with your fellow students in your class, just because one of the things with PLCs or any of the micro-political leadership in terms of decisions is it's about decisions, and you can't always make everybody happy, and sometimes different people will be frustrated when you move their cheese a little bit. But how amazing to say planning is separate and this is truly about the work of the PLC. That's exciting. The other thing that
you were right, there were some people that got upset about it because the classroom teachers, of course, got this time, but the special teachers, the encore teachers, were the one that had to pick up that extra. And the way administration kind of framed it was very smart. I mean, they laid out the time that we had students. We were with students this X amount of hours, and specials, had lunch, had their planning, and they were with students X amount of hours each week. And it was really a difference, even though you get paid the same. So they wrapped it up with, it was smart.
Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah. And that's one of those things where it's frustrating sometimes as an administrator, because you want to look at everybody and say, I hear you, but we are here for kids. We want you as adults to be happy and feel fulfilled and honored and valued. But bottom line, we are not here for the adults. We're here for the kids. And that's tough sometimes, but I would love to hear more about that. That's a really interesting schedule. The other thing you said early on in terms of going elementary to middle, if you haven't had a chance to work at a different grade span, I really encourage you to find a neighboring schools on, in all the different grade configurations than the one you're used to or have spent the most time in, as part of your internship. And usually administrators are great about this. Sometimes your districts even have something set up where you can go visit other schools. But I really encourage you to try to do that. Particularly if you work at a middle or high school, just the law of averages, it's more than likely that you're going to end up at some point at an elementary school. And I encourage you, if that's the case, to try to spend some time in one. So in the case of Amanda, probably want to spend some time in a high school at some point, where it gets even more interesting in terms of scheduling what you're talking about.
That's where I started. I started in high school, so I've done the high school thing.
Good. Then you have run the gamut, and that looks good on a resume. So don't forget to include all that. So, okay. Who else?
I'll share that my principal has made PLTs also a huge part of our day, and has committed to a 2-hour block for PLTs weekly.
Dang.
And so the way she has worked it is she has given specialists no morning duties. And the day that grade level has PLT, the special or connections follow right against the PLT. So we get a 2-hour block, but then the specialist or connections teacher gets that extra time free. So rather than complaining that they're actually covering an extra class or an extra time, they're actually getting additional planning as well.
Wow. Christine, I would love for you to share that with your classmates as well if you have access to that schedule. That's cool.
I created the schedule. That was part of my job this summer. So
I love it. That's awesome. Again, you know what we're hearing from both Amanda and Christine is there are all kinds of options. The key is we say, okay, you know, we have this, and if you've read some work by the DeFores, you know that Rick DeFore is very clear about we can't add time on, for the most part, to the beginning and end of the day. So if this is the chunk of time we have, what do we do with it? You know, what does that look like? Good. That's exciting. That's awesome. Boy, you can really get some work done in 2 hours. Wow.
Yes. The problem, though, with this course is I'm getting so much done I can't get my tasks finished because we're working ahead of the tasks.
That's hard. You would be like, I know we're about the students, but you guys have to slow down because I have schoolwork to do.
Well, that's what I say freeze. We need to videotape.
Yeah. I know. It's like you have to predict ahead of time with a crystal ball to know what is going to be coming up. So
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, I feel you. All right. Who else?
We kind of mimic that same model. We have 8:30 to 10 o'clock, a grade level, 1 day a week gets to meet for PLTs. TAs cover from when kids are arriving, and then they get a double special that day. Mm-hmm. So they're not missing any instruction, just get a double special that day. And then we also do that for our SPED team, our arts team, intervention, and AIG as well. So everybody's able to have that uninterrupted time, which has been powerful.
Yeah. I mean, really, it's one of those things where, you know, and you think about adult learners, you've got some folks who are going to say yes to anything. Like, yeah, let's do it. And then some folks who are going to be a little more reluctant, and then some folks who are going to be a lot more reluctant, and then some folks who are just going to go creeping. And so you have to start seeing those successes. And for all of you, figuring out, how do I make change happen? And yet do it in such a way where I'm really working with teacher leaders and I get some successes early on and then share those successes so that folks almost don't have a choice but to comply and agree. And because you're going to have really 4 distinct types of adult learners in your school at any time, not to mention generational issues. That makes it interesting. Who else?
All of this is great creative scheduling, because you're right, there's only so much time in the day, and you have to be creative as an administrator to carve a little place on the plate for things that you want your staff to do. And most staff members will be more willing to do that when you've tried to accommodate, you know, their wishes. You're not just taking away their planning and say you have to do this, but, you know, with these creative schedules. So I think that's great that you all are getting that experience. Students are getting that experience in their internship to do it. Just remember that too.
Yeah. And that's something to think about in terms of micro-political leadership, and the different things you've shared about PLC times and making it work. You're going to have folks, and you can already see what group kind of, I don't want to say gets picked on, but just the law of the way it works. I want you to really consider, and if you get a chance to think about this and practice and experience some of it in your internships, that would be great. But when you have sort of non-core teachers, what do you do to make them feel valued and supported and respected? Because we run the risk in the kind of schedule that some of you have talked about with PLCs or PLTs of a large group of folks feeling really extra and unnecessary. And that's not at all the case. We know the research. So many of our students come to school, show up, keep going because of the non-core areas. That's so often where folks are able to truly make that relationship connection and be that adult for kids. So it's going to be really important as we talk about some of this for you to consider and look for role models. Who does a good job of making sure that every staff member feels valued? What does that look like when you have someone who goes in the cafeteria and they feel like rock stars as cafeteria workers, or any number of other things? That's powerful when you really you've got somebody leading the ship who makes everybody feel valued. So something to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Who else has some creative examples of good systems and procedures and scheduling of anything in place ahead of time?
Kind of piggybacking off of what you said, our school at the end of the day, we are the Green Hornets. That's our mascot.
Mm-hmm.
So we call it Green Hornet time, but it's the last 30 minutes of every day. And we include, it's all hands on deck. So any adult that's in the building, whether they're a special teacher, cafeteria worker, bus driver, anything, everybody is assigned to a grade level. And we kind of split up the kids and we use it as an acceleration remediation time. But we try to spread that vision to everybody. It's like it takes a team.
I love it.
We need everybody to reach our mission. So
that sounds great. And it's scary and uncomfortable for folks sometimes. You know, if I have a high school diploma and I'm coming in and you're asking me to be part of that all hands on deck, that can be pretty intimidating. So we have to think about who we pair folks with and what that looks like. But talk about empowering to say, you know, I work at the school, but you know, I'm a part of student success too. That's pretty cool. It's very exciting. Who else? Thanks, Lauren.
So I'm going to piggyback on what Lauren just said. Our school does the same thing, but we're very limited on extra personnel. So what we've done is we have met cross grade levels. And K3, we have leveled groups that the students will actually come into a different classroom with a different teacher, and they'll work with people on their level, but they may not be from the same grade. So my group, I may have 4 third graders, 4 second graders, and a few first graders, but I teach second grade. So we've just started that this year, and it's been a big transition, but I can see it really being beneficial.
I can see where that would be really challenging and uncomfortable, at least initially, but how awesome. It's like the way the real world works. You know, a friend of mine who is a longtime educator said, why is it that we are perfectly comfortable with kids learning how to walk and talk at different times in different ways? You know, it's completely differentiated. And yet suddenly when they start school, they're supposed to learn and do everything at the same time in the same pace based on age in the same way. So I love that you're doing that. I can't wait to hear what that looks like this year as you go forward. That's cool. Awesome. Anybody else have an idea or something to share in terms of successful structure, procedure, protocol ahead of time?
We have a system at my high school called Nighttime. And I know a school in North Carolina maybe started that whole thing, but it may have been called Power Lunch or something like that. But what it is a time frame during the school day where students can be scheduled to get tutoring, makeup tests, and other assignments. It can be that they were absent and had some makeup work or something like that. Last year we started doing that, and it was kind of chaotic. And so with all the issues that we had with it last year, the students just kind of had the freedom to go to, okay, does that teacher have space right now? Okay, I'm just going to run in her room and stay in there for this time period. But this year they actually came up with a whole app where every night at 9 o'clock, the students go in and there's 3 different blocks, block A, B, and C. And you can see every teacher's schedule. So they worked out a nice schedule for every teacher. You're either going to be doing tutoring during that time, you're going to have your PLC, or you're going to have your lunch, or you have a session called Open, where any student can come into your room. So the students fill out their schedule at 9 o'clock at night. They say, okay, do I want to go to lunch first? Okay, I want to go to lunch during A. I want to go to Miss Palin's session during B because she's open and I don't have any work to make up, so I can go to an open session and just hang out with my friends. or I can't go to Miss Palin during C because she has PLC at that time. That's her scheduled time for PLC. So the students have to
How
take
21st century of you. I love it.
they have to take, it's a very extensive app that the students have to go on to set up their schedule. And then that hour and a half, they're 30-minute sessions. They're either in tutoring, lunch, they have to pick a lunch, or just, hanging out with friends or homework zone. Some students are doing yoga at that time. Some students are playing Frisbee with a teacher at that time. So that nighttime is set up so that they can do extracurricular activities. The social aspect of the school day that is kind of important to them. Eat their lunch, hang out with their favorite teacher for 30 minutes or whatever. And the teachers can have their PLC time as well. So that's already kind of cut into the schedule, and that's protected time.
It helps blur those lines in a good way in terms of school being this separate place that's not real world. The more you bring in things like that in terms of decision making and choice and real world activities, the more they see school as a part of that rather than this separate thing they must endure. So I think there's like a lot of benefits from that.
Yeah, the students enjoy it.
Yeah. I see over in the comments, Jesse's talking about Smart Lunch. I know some of you, it's probably mostly high schools, have done Smart Lunch. There's also, at my daughter's high school, I like this more for the most part, Smart Period. So it's between first and second period at the high school. And they have this 30-40 minute time period where it's not as open as it used to be. It's fairly well restricted, but the idea is, if you have below a certain grade, or if you want help or clubs or et cetera, they meet during that time. And then also, Sarah, if you don't mind, will you mute, please?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And so during that time, they just have all of these options in terms of, what they can do, but it's also PLC time. And one of the things, some schools have found a lot of success with Smart Lunch, and some of them have said, you know what, it's kind of a free-for-all, and we end up monitoring kids and trying to find them, and it's not productive, and et cetera, et cetera. I've seen it work both ways, but we definitely are getting sort of creative in terms of what that looks like. So we have about 10 minutes left, and I wish we could have hours together because you all have these great ideas, and I hope that you, if you are in a school where you're hearing some of this and you're thinking, wow, I really want to try that, I want to do some of those things, that you will, rewatch this or make sure you write down that person's name and get in contact and share. One of the things that we sometimes risk missing with online classes is being able to have those relationships and connections. And this is a way to remedy that to a certain extent. So I hope you will call on each other and do further and ask further questions and share further ideas about what you do. So what about, we'll take I definitely want to save some minutes for questioning, for different questions you might have about things that are coming up or this week or et cetera. But does anybody have or something where you say, wow, our school is really struggling with this, and here's what's going on in terms of a system that is needed or a structure that is needed? And you're in a safe place. I mean, I know it's harder when we're online, but you are.
I can tell you that, listening to you guys talk about a schedule where folks can get together without penalty, not before school or after school or in place of. Yeah. I work at an alternative school, and so we're very limited on staff. Right. So it's really hard for us to schedule time within a school day while students are still there because we don't have the support personnel to ship those children out to.
Yeah.
We used to do a common planning for high school and a common planning for middle school. Mm-hmm. And we shipped all the students out to their elective classes, and the 4 core high school teachers met for a PLC. But we have done very little with meeting to talk about data, meeting to talk about improving systems. It's all been logistics of how do we handle the behavior of the students. And so we've really struggled ever since I've been here at this school. We've really struggled trying to get in place, looking at the data and looking at what the students might need in order to curb some of that behavior. We've just been putting out fires.
Yeah.
So that's something that we've struggled with, that I'm like trying really hard to overcome with this first task of ours, to create
like when do we even
some
meet?
kind of data.
Yeah, what do we talk about? It's so much harder when you're working as a singleton. But then I see, if any of you work in an early college or are familiar with the concept of an early college, I see folks work together who teach different subjects, and it's like this beautiful collaborative thing that they do all the time. Having said that, with an alternative school, it really does pose its own set of challenges. I have this great story, and at some point, if you want to email me, I'll get you connected with this school. But there's an alternative school that I've worked a lot with, and they did a good job for a long time. But then this guy who basically, it was his life stream to be principal of this alternative school. He just was passionate about it, and what he has done, I just cry when I go over there. It's amazing. And so they collaborate all the time at the school, and man, the kids are it's just a different experience. I can't even tell you. I would love to let you meet with him, get you met with him, because I think it would be a really neat experience to see how it can work at an alternative school, because it's such a different situation from going to your local high school and saying, hey, how do you guys make this work? So get in touch with me, Tammy, and I'll see if we can make that happen. Where do you live?
I will. Thank you. I'm in Shelby.
Oh, then, yeah, we're good. Okay. I can get you.
Okay.
Yay. Okay.
Okay, great.
Good.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. I'm excited for you. Anybody else have a situation where it's been particularly difficult to make some of this happen, or you're just not seeing your school being where you would like to be?
One thing that's been a challenge for us this year is it's kind of double-edged. We've implemented mindfulness, and 3 times a week for 20 minutes a day for students to do mindfulness. And I think you're familiar with where I work, because I'm at that school you were speaking of earlier. And it is challenging because we have 4 different daily schedules, and it is really difficult to try, and it's not set on like 5 minutes or 0 minutes or anything. It's like at 1:11 is class change, and it's tricky because there's a little snafu in one of them right now. So some of the grades are overlapping, and everybody's in the hallways at the same time, and it's half the time people know what day of the week it is, or what schedule they're on, or where they're supposed to be, or when they're supposed to be there. And so it's just a group effort with everybody in the building, students and adults, trying to say, okay, today's Tuesday, we're on this schedule. It's not an A-B schedule. It's just different schedules, and trying to get the kids in that routine is difficult. And it's, especially this past week, it's been really difficult because we've had different schedules every day.
Yeah. And Sarah, you bring up a good point that April talked about last night. She said, on the one hand, it's great that we've implemented things about mindfulness. And then I don't know if the rest of you are familiar with CRIM training, but if you're not, look it up, because it's pretty amazing. But it's like all these things we're talking about. When you implement something, or your school decides to go in a certain direction, it's like, okay, so what do we give up? What is going, we can't have this utopia. So what is this going to look like? And it's probably going to be messy at first. And how do we support each other? And how do we be teacher leaders while we're in the classroom, and then be administrators who are really good at this idea of micropolitical leadership? But you're bringing up some really important points. Like, we implement one thing and suddenly it messes with everything else. And that does make it hard, particularly when you're navigating lots of kids and different schedules and something very different from what's been done before. So Sarah, I feel for you for that and for many things this week. So we're thinking about you. But yeah, that'll be a work in progress in terms of making that happen.
Yeah.
I teach at an elementary school, and usually we have our PLC during our planning period,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very you feel rushed. It's time constraint. We have like 40 minutes, and by the time you take the children to their activity and you get to the meeting,
15.
lost 5 of that,
Yeah.
and it's just rush, rush, rush.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the teachers feel like they're being penalized because this is my planning time. I need this 40 minutes to get this, and that done.
Mm-hmm.
And I need this 40 minutes. Need a little me time because you're dealing with
you're worn out.
40 50
9,
10-year-olds. And it's a big deal for us to be able to go to the restroom.
No.
To get a teacher to cover your class long enough to go to the restroom. So we just don't have, we have very, very limited time to do any type of POC.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you're discussing the data, but it's rush. We
discussed the data. Okay.
Right.
Well,
so we can go
see you
get
later. Bye.
Yeah.
And you never get to it becomes that, what's it called? DRIP syndrome, data rich, information poor. Like we spend the whole time talking about the data. One thing you might want to try is if you say, okay, we've really got, in all honesty, maybe 25, 30 minutes. What if we set up a schedule where we said, we're going to talk about celebrations for the first couple of minutes, or maybe we just say we each have 30 seconds to say whatever we want. And if it's, I hate my life today, then so be it. But then spend, say, 5 to 7 minutes on the data. And that's it. And then we get to the so what. So what are we going to do about what we just talked about? And it doesn't answer the bigger question of you need more different time. It's not optimal, especially when you hear about some of the schedules from earlier where you're like, oh yeah, you get planning time and PLC. Are you kidding?
Exactly.
But it might be worth a try to get it really structured and say, because that was the problem with data teams. We spent the whole time talking about data and we never got to the so what, about why it mattered. So something to think about. And if you want, and Dorothy, if you want to get in touch with me, I've got some sample schedules with a school who really kind of had the same